Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Mike here, and today I'm going to be dishing out a little bit of advice on a very common question that I get from my students, and I think will be useful to anyone else who is trying to answer this question: how to break into the game industry. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because I love games. That's how I got started into computer science, and I've had the opportunity to work at some gaming companies and do some graphics projects. So this talk's going to be really focused on those who want to transition to the game industry or students who are looking for their break in the industry. Now, for me, several years ago, I was reading books like this that had advice about sort of starting as a tester and working your way up. And some of those ways might be, again, great ways to get started in the industry, but depending on your position, if you're a programmer, for instance, it really matters that you have actually built something and can showcase it. So those are the points that I'm going to emphasize today. And perhaps we'll get some experts in the game industry who can also comment below in the comments or pass on their wisdom as well. But here will be my advice and just a few different things that I think you should be thinking about if you're trying to work in the game industry. Now, one of the first things I do want you to know is that games are competitive. Games, entertainment, meaning Pixar, Disney Animation, these types of studios are going to be competitive. A lot of folks want to work in the entertainment space. It's just like Hollywood, for instance, where a lot of people want to be actors, but you really do have to put in the work. So that can be one of the things that you do need to consider. So how are you going to stand out in this particular industry? The good news is you don't necessarily have to also stand out. You can also build your own studios and your own games. I'll touch on that in a little bit about what that means and maybe how to get started. But either way, you can still make your break and work into this wonderful, fun, and creative industry. And that's truly what it is. But again, you have to put in the work to break into this industry. Now, for most folks who are watching this, I'm going to assume you are watching this because you have some sort of programming interest or more of a software engineering background. I think the same advice will apply if you want to be a level designer or artist as far as building portfolios and some of the techniques you can do. But really, I'm going to target this towards programmers. So with that said, let me go ahead and advance a little bit forward here. And, we've got to cover our basics, having a resume. So if I go ahead and just flip the window here and you search for game developer resumes here, you can go ahead and just click on, the first example and at least find some sort of template. If you're a student, you probably have some career services where you can maybe get some help and even some friends who can review your resume for spelling mistakes and these types of things here. But you should have some sort of template which you can find online to fill out what you've done. What classes have you taken? What other jobs have you done? And really highlighting different projects that you have completed and what the actual result was. Did you make something 10% faster? Did you implement some algorithm in a more efficient way? Using various verbs for the actions that you took are good things to display on a resume. So I'm going to touch on those points again when talking about portfolio, and I think there are lots of other great talks on building a resume, but that is sort of the basics. So you have to create one and sort of get started. And again, that's what this video is going to be about, sort of just getting started. So let's go ahead back to our little PowerPoint here and see what else we need to be working on. So the other thing that I want folks to be doing to sort of stand out and show your enthusiasm and passion for working in the game industry is to build a game portfolio. And again, that really means having an actual portfolio with pictures and videos showcasing the actual work that you've done. Because again, it's a competitive industry. It's very product driven, meaning that, well, to get hired and working at a studio, you'll need to be able to produce. These are real jobs oftentimes. You're not just in a training or apprenticeship in many cases when working in the industry. Again, not all cases, but in my experience, you're often working on something meaningful, even if it's, adjacent to the project. You do have to have software engineering skills. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit just what I mean by building a portfolio here. And the best way to really learn about this is to look at a few portfolios that actually exist. So I don't know any of these folks here, but I just Googled again, game portfolios, and started taking a look at a few portfolios. So you can go ahead and see some of these folks. Again, I don't know them, and but I am able to at least analyze them and maybe take away a few things. So I want to show you how to think critically about some of these resumes and what might be useful. And again, there's some links here you can search for various tips and so on. Most conferences, which I'll talk about, or maybe your career centers, again, if you're a student, will have various advice as well as how to structure these things. So make sure you do take advantage of those services. And again, if you're not currently a student, then that's okay too. You can look at this little exercise we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and just select one of these. And you can sort of do this as an exercise. Even better if you have a friend nearby who also wants to work in the industry, and you can kind of think critically about some of these particular resumes, or excuse me, these portfolios. Either one is actually, I'll tell you good here, because again, I didn't want to pick on anyone, but, leave that to yourself to sort of figure out what things that you like here. But with that said, if you want to pause the video and do that exercise, feel free to. But in the meantime, if you've paused and 5 minutes have passed, let's go ahead and advance in time and look at David's portfolio here. So thank you for sharing this, for building a website, David, with your portfolio. But, first and foremost, the name is clear and visible. That's great. I can also see the position that this person is interested in, and you should match that. Again, many folks watching this, I'm assuming, are going to be some sort of game designer, software engineer. You don't have to invent something creative here. You can look at actual job listings and see, what you want to actually target. So there's the position that whoever this David is marketing himself as. And the website overall is easy to navigate. Again, this doesn't have to be a very complicated website with lots of drop downs. I can very quickly, click on home to see the home. And in this case, they've got the different projects that they have worked on professionally. And even some other, if you don't have professional games to your name, which again, most folks aren't going to, right? Having your personal projects listed out, maybe if you've done some speaking or something interesting, and then your resume and contact information should be visible. Now, the next thing, so that's the contact information. I think it's also nice, especially in the game industry, to have at least a little blurb about, why you're a fun person to work with, because you will spend a lot of time working. So again, for a portfolio, I think there is room, at the least in your contact information to show some fun pictures or hobbies. So it doesn't purely have to be all business here. But let's go ahead and get to this next part. And I know this is going to be tiny for you to read on the screen, but if I actually click on this project, I can see what David's contributions were here. So if we actually click on this image or follow the link above, again, easy to navigate. This is a simple page that will load very quickly. I also imagine it loads nicely on mobile. Again, by keeping your web page simple, those things tend to translate well on desktop and mobile as well. But anyways, let's go ahead and take a look at this. I'll move out of the way here. And what I like here at the top right corner is an image immediately. Images tend to load fast on a website, so we would want that to load first as opposed to maybe an embedded video or something of that nature. So I personally like JPEG images at the top, and just a few at the top, maybe 2 or 3 images to kind of showcase what has been done. And then a video of your actual work is useful. Now, of course, if you're coding here, it's not going to make as much sense to have, a video of you coding, but I'll talk about GitHub in a moment and what you'll want to share otherwise here. But if possible, again, if you're a graphics programmer, having an actual video, which I'll move out of the way here, showcasing what you've done is of high value here. Okay. And then the next thing that you'll see here, and I'll make it a little bit larger for you, is actually having some bullet points of your skills and duties here. So what did you actually contribute on this project? Again, maybe you are an owner of something. And again, if this is just a student project, that's fine. You could say, I coded this algorithm. I was in charge of writing the artificial intelligence and the A-star pathfinding algorithm from scratch. Okay, really highlight what you have done and your contributions. And from the interviewer's perspective, that gives them something to ask you about, something interesting. And you say, oh, how did you handle this case in this, third-person game with the artificial intelligence? And then you can kind of dive into the details, right? They'll know what to ask you. So it helps guide your interviewers. They're already looking at, your portfolio and interested. So give them a little bit more about what you've done. Again, verbs are useful for the actions that you took. If you can quantify things and say, hey, I improved performance by 10%, or I profiled, I debugged, I use this specific language that, folks commonly use in games, whatever that might be, or for the position that you're using, that's useful information. Okay, so those are the types of things that can go into this bolded list. It's nice and brief. I think it's to the point here of what this particular person's done, and I think it's a nice thing to have there. All right, and then of course you can have any additional background, which I have behind me here, maybe an interesting story, but again, you're giving some images to draw in whoever is reviewing your portfolio, some of the bullet points for the things that they care about, and then you can go more in depth as needed. I think in many cases, if this gets to your manager, they will read some of these things here and say, oh, okay, this was the specific subsystem that you worked on, or you coded this game from scratch, and here's how you made Pong, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, or whatever, portfolio projects that you're using more interesting. Okay. So that's the idea with a portfolio. I think this is a nice example. I think we can go back and look at these other pages here, or you can Google some portfolios and also get something of high value here. So those are just some of my thoughts here. Now, so again, just to summarize this, what do you sort of write within your portfolio? And I've also got a link here to the Game Developers Conference Vault on just some tips on getting hired here. So let's actually click on that here so you can see here. This should, work for anybody. Again, you'll get some more advice. So again, don't just take my advice, but you can review some of these slides here, to get some of these ideas here. But again, just highlighting what I mentioned here on how to write your portfolio. Again, clear action verbs. You can kind of look here, right? Programmed a custom game engine in C++ that allows for collision detection within a team of 3 engine programmers. Even be more specific here, particular collision detection algorithms, what that meant here. How many particles you could have collide, these little tiny details, again, that are showing actionable things. What did you program? What did you script? What did you build is useful. Okay, so talk about how you did it, how many things, whatever data you have, and why does it matter? What was cool about this project, and the pictures and so on can show that off in a way. All right, so the next part of this, so how to actually build something like this. Now, I've just shown you a relatively nice website from somebody who has many years of professional experience to build and sort of showcase this. But you're saying, Mike, I'm just new to the industry. Where do I begin here? How do I show off my professional portfolio here? Well, first things first here is, your first iteration of your website doesn't have to be necessarily perfect, but you do have to have something to get started with. And I do recommend, if possible, to retrieve your domain name or something that's, professional, representing your name or your initials, at some point. That's just another useful tip if you have business cards, or again, it's just a little bit easier to find you. So I'd recommend those types of things for you. Okay, so, here's a template here, and I'll get out of the way here so you can see what's going on here. And again, nothing fancy here, but I want to give you a actionable item to do as you're watching this video, right? Not just to watch this, but you can see I have here, a little header, contact information, GitHub, and so on. And then some image here. I didn't make this game here, but you can use it as a placeholder for now. And then some of the bullet points that we talked about what you did on the game, what the game's about, and then maybe a YouTube clip or two below it. And that's really it here on this information here. Right? You can sketch something out like this on a Google Doc and literally export that out just to get started. So what I would like you to do is go ahead and, again, if you're watching this video and just trying to figure out, well, how do I get started, or I'm stuck and really having trouble here, pause the video and just make a table and lay out some of this information. Again, I want to lower your barrier to entry here and just help you get started, right? You don't have to download a Bootstrap framework and learn, CSS and HTML and spend all of your time designing custom graphics. Just get the information laid out to start here. Now, the other thing that I want to touch on with portfolios, especially if you're going for a software engineering role, and here are some prettier templates if you do want a Bootstrap, right? You can use some of these here. And again, they'll make your website a little bit more mobile friendly and stuff, but just kind of fill in the blanks here. But let me go ahead and give you a little bit of strategy here. And the one I want to talk about with your portfolio here is posting your code and your projects on GitHub, right? You'll have many projects if you're working as a student or on the side of things, if you're a working professional already trying to transition in the game industry. And you'll want to, have a GitHub here. Okay, so I just picked a random game engine here. We have all the code. From my experience from interviewing, those folks that are interviewing you do actually look at your code, right? They'll want to pick out something and ask you about it. And I think it's very useful if you're a programmer, especially if you're in graphics, to please include pictures in your GitHub, showing off the graphics project that you did, the actual engine. If you can include GIFs or little, YouTube videos, just like we talked about, those are appropriate in GitHub as well. Right, I'm already interested in the Wicked engine, right? This happens to be a mature tool, but you can look through various other GitHub projects, and reading a lot of text is a lot more difficult than just having some nice images to sort of draw you in, right? And I can very clearly also see this person's contact information. You can link back to your portfolio, say what your status is with your LinkedIn that you're looking to get hired, and so on. So again, this is a relatively mature project here that has the luxury of showing lots of pictures. But again, if you're applying for a graphics position or a game design position and have the repository, do show some pictures. That's something that I often see omitted. I think folks are afraid that it might not look good. If you're using stock art assets or these types of things, but I think it is useful to show your project actually working, right? If you can capture that. So that's one thing that I'll say here. Now let's go ahead and strategize. Again, if you're a student or newer to the game industry, how do you get in? What's going to actually happen? Well, I mean, there's a few different things that you can do here. One is to start immersing yourself in the game development community. So that means going to things like local meetups. So you can look at meetup.com, which will have industry events. Depending on what city you're in, there might also be other local meetup groups, outside of meetup.com. But generally speaking, you can probably find something here. You can probably find a Independent Game Development Association group. Most states have one, and try to get in touch with folks who might be working there. The other stuff that you could even do is just, simply start by joining Discords, forums, kind of lurking around in a way, just to, again, learn about some of the game development terminology that's relevant in your field. Again, that sort of immersion can really help you when the time comes as you're sort of building up your portfolio and learning and absorbing information that you might not be getting directly as a university student or from tutorials online, for instance. And of course, if this type of group doesn't exist yet, whether at your university or the local city that you're in, you could create it. You could certainly try to create it virtually and start the meetup and just say, hey, I'm a learner. Do other folks want to learn or read with me? I see those things all the time happening on meetup.com. So I think those are also valuable things that you could actually be doing. Speaking of just learning here, let's go ahead and navigate to some of the more popular game engines. And again, assuming you're a programmer here, going to Unity 3D, the learning section, learners, and just going ahead and learning based off of some of the tutorials that are provided would be something useful. So Unity 3D and the Unreal Engine have lots of great tutorials that you can sort of start from, right? So sort of take the mystery out of, well, where do I begin? Just go with the template projects, build the things here, and you'll slowly get immersed here, right? The very first project you create doesn't have to be a completely original game. Most game developers that I know have iterated by building the classic games first, following tutorials, and then sort of growing that way. So I think that's great. Same thing for Unreal Engine. If you go to the Learn section and the learning resources, let's go ahead for students here, following some of the template projects. And you can tell they've really invested a lot here for learners here. So, try these different projects here, depending on what your interests are. Again, programmer, game designer, level designer, animator, whatever, you'll find various workflows for how to build up this portfolio here. All right, so that's just on being strategic, building up your portfolio, even if it is with those tutorial projects, and then you can sort of change and tweak things around and say, here's a project I built. It was based off of this tutorial, and I thought it would be cool to improve the artificial intelligence with this algorithm or using this new plugin or whatever. Again, just showing that you can build things and kind of create this portfolio. I think that's very useful if you're just starting from scratch. Another great way to sort of build up your portfolio and gain experience, and especially gain experience with others, is to participate in a game jam. So game jams are essentially hackathons. They're usually ranging between 24 and 48 hours. One of the most popular is the Global Game Jam, which is usually in January and February of most years. And that's where you're literally just trying to build a game. In fact, I've participated in game jams where I was literally just saying, I'm going to dedicate this 24 hours with some rest in between, of course, but actually to build some game during that time. So, I think employers like seeing this. Again, it's showing your passion. Again, it's these events, you're meeting and working with other like-minded people who are also interested or maybe already working in the game industry and can be mentors, perhaps to you because they'll be, more local or available. You'll have worked with them. So I think that's a really valuable thing, especially for students seeking their first entry point, whether it's an internship or co-op into the game industry. Having participated in some of these things, again, is just another great way you can get started. As I mentioned, assuming you're a student, hopefully you're taking some classes in the relevant area, programming, learning some of the technology that is used in the game industry, some of the fundamental skills. I think that's really useful. If you're not a student, or even if you are a student and can supplement that with, following a YouTube series, a free course on Coursera or something, there's plenty of resources out there. Perhaps folks can comment below on this video if they want to share some resources that they found particularly useful, but even just unity3d.com, Unreal has many sources, LinkedIn Learning, Pluralsight. Again, use these resources to build things and continue to gradually build up that portfolio. That is my recommendation. All right, and last but not least, there are game industry events if you are financially able to attend these. Many of them you can often go as a volunteer working at the conference for, say, 20 hours. It's usually pretty standard, so about half of the conference, and then you get a free registration. Typically, sometimes you also get subsidies for travel, so that might be an option for some folks, and you should take advantage of if that's possible. I think a lot of folks underestimate that. Again, that could be at very big conferences like the Game Developer Conference, or it could be at small conferences that are local, where you can just kind of help out and, again, immerse yourself in the industry with like-minded folks. So I've just listed a few here. And again, I really want to highlight the Global Game Jam. I think that's a wonderful thing to, get started building games in the game industry here. So with that said, I do want to provide one little caveat here. I'll move out of the way, that attending these events, attending these meetups, is usually a matter, if the meetup's free, of just RSVPing and going. Again, whether that's virtual or maybe it is in person, I think that's, a great thing to do. But my little pro tip here is, if you're just going to those events with a handful of resumes that you're handing out, I don't necessarily know if that's the best practice. I think taking some time to get to know the folks there versus showing up the first 5 minutes and handing out business cards, get to know folks and kind of talk to them and see, what events are going on, what companies might be hiring, what skills you should be developing depending on, where you're in the industry. In general, I think folks are sort of appreciative and understand, for example, if you're a student, that you're still learning and trying to get your foot into the door, because pretty much everybody has a story about how they got into the industry or whatever their particular career path is. So, by all means, talk to folks, just be, courteous and attend the event because you're excited to learn about whatever that event is, graphics, programming, etc., etc. So just a few closing thoughts here before I leave you here. Start drafting your portfolio. It's easy, even if you don't want to make it public because you're using, that very simple template that I showed you and just a Google Doc, that's fine. But at least collect the information of what you might think is interesting so you don't have to do all that work, right? Creating a Google Doc or a Word doc stored in the cloud somewhere isn't that much of an effort, even if you just keep a few notes. Same thing for your resume if you don't have one to start collecting it. And again, start doing things iteratively, building little pieces of software, little games, trying out new algorithms, trying to implement a data structure. And then overall, following some tutorials and just keep grading. I think that's the true secret, and that there are no secrets for getting into the game industry is just to build interesting things so you keep learning, showing your interests. So whether that happens at school, maybe after hours a little bit, I think that can be useful. Now, one of my students recently was asking about game adjacent positions. This is sort of about game industry stuff. I think it's also wonderful to look at other opportunities. So I'll show you the game dev map, which is pretty useful for just finding and discovering what companies might be nearby you, wherever you are in the world. So you can go ahead and click on that as you need. But there are other things you can look at, the Intels of the world, the AMDs, the Qualcomm, which do a lot of graphics and game work or might have other positions that are related. There's even CAD industry for graphics programmers that might be interesting for doing 3D graphics. So finding your way into one of these roles, I think, is a useful thing to do here. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and just end that here. I hope that was useful in giving some folks some advice about breaking into the game industry, graphics industry, or some tangential information or tangential industry there. And as always, folks, if you have some questions, make sure that you comment below and I'll try to answer them. Or I'm hoping we'll get some industry experts who can maybe also give you a few pro tips that I haven't covered here. But that's sort of the point. Keep asking around, keep working one step at a time, and I'm sure you'll be able to get to where you need to get to. All right. Thanks for your time, folks, as always, and I'll see you next time.